welcome you all on behalf of both organizations, ISAC and the Development Foundation. It's something very interesting that this idea about identifying the elements of heritage in development thinking of India emerged in the discussions somewhere. I'm not exactly recollecting the down the line in about last 8-9 months back, and then the similar thinking people were identified and got together to think about where do we go wrong and what is that we have a lot to learn about from the heritage of the country. I am very happy that we have with us Sri Rajiv Malhotra, a person who has been unique in his understanding of India's development, India as such, and his books are making headlines all over the world. We are fortunate to have you, sir, and on behalf of both the organizations, I welcome you. It's a proud privilege to be with you and listen to you. In addition to that, we have persons from all the fields, and especially those who have mastered this understanding, but then had no time to write it out. It was only the provocation that led them to write. And I can say that each one here, starting from Vinay Chandra, Professor Narayana, Shankar, Raju, Kumar, this side, Chaitra, Ram Krishnan, Sunil Ray, and all others. It's a pleasure, Mohan, who joined today. It's a pleasure to be with a group which is so committed and so nice to think about. That it is essential that each one of us have to make our thinking and bring about changes in our thinking process itself. If we do that, probably we may be able to change minuscule of the thinking process in the country. And this particular program, this particular, I don't know whether it's book, it's project, it will be thinking, whatever it is, whatever it culminates into. But what we discuss in the process is something which is changing us inside out and makes us to think about the heritage thinking in this country. Once again, I welcome you all, and I'm sure that you should feel free to express yourself in all respects in whichever area you would like to.
Today, this is the second workshop which we are doing on the subject of identifying elements of heritage of development thinking in India. I will just briefly mention the purpose of what we are doing here, and also we'll go through what is the deliberation for today. Then we will want Rajiv Malhotra to speak as a keynote speaker for this program today. We thought of this as Professor Deshpande mentioned a few months ago, maybe almost 8-9 months ago. We thought the GDP based growth is actually now taking the whole country the globe, the planet Earth towards a disaster because of the environmental hazards and social and cultural issues we are facing. Therefore, we thought the ancient Indian knowledge systems can be providing some solution, and therefore we thought we should study, we should understand, we should identify the elements of development thinking in the Indian knowledge systems. So that is why we started this process. The purpose is to, next slide. The purpose is basically to work out on a project for reanalyzing the history of ancient Indian civilization, to rediscover the heritage of development thinking in Indian subcontinent, to understand the contemporary utility of such thinking that was embedded in the civilization continuum, to remodel the institutional arrangements of state, family, society, market, and all the institutions of today, and rebuild a meaningful, holistic, and a sustainable development model which is based on our civilizational experience. That is the purpose of the entire exercise here. So several eminent scholars have written papers, and we got those papers, one set of papers presented 3 months ago. Now we have got more themes added, and some people who had presented papers have already revised it. And the idea of each of these is to select some key themes in the development thinking. And what we want is we want to understand the current worldview and what was the Indian systems during the pre-colonial times and what happened during the colonial period, and now what are the impacts subsequent to post-colonial, and now the globalization impacts. And now based on that we have to come out with some alternative suggestions, the principles coming out of the ancient Indian civilizational thinking for building a new model. This is the purpose, and this is how we expect all the papers to be presented. In the next couple of minutes, we will have Rajiv Malhotra giving us the keynote address. I'll just mention the importance of having Rajiv Malhotra with us today, because I don't know, some of you must have seen his latest book, which is Being Different. He has identified some of the fundamental differences and the key principles of Indian civilizational thinking, and therefore I think it will be very important to have his thoughts, which will act as some foundation for some of our thinking of the workshop of today. So with this, I will request Rajiv Malhotra to speak to us and guide us.
Thank you, both gentlemen and both organizations for organizing this event and for inviting me to get it started. My foundation, which is based in Princeton, New Jersey, has for 15 years been doing a number of projects relevant to this. And my own involvement has started 20 years ago. So we published maybe 5% of the research we've done and written, and now we want to accelerate the output because we've been keeping it private too long. Just to give you an example of what's relevant to this, we have a project called History of Indian Science and Technology, which is very important to understand what were the development models for practical things, not philosophy, not religion, not literature and abstract thinking, but practical things like agriculture, medicine, metallurgy, city building, civil engineering, these marine technology. So these are the themes on which we decided we will do one or more volumes each. So water management is 3 volumes covering 3 different periods. Metallurgy, we have about 4 or 5 volumes. So total we have planned 20 volumes, out of which 9 are done. 9 exist. Unfortunately, the publishing people have not done a great job of spreading knowledge about it and disseminating it. But that would be something you should get a set for yourselves. Okay. We started in the year 2000, and till last year, 2011, we have done an annual conference, only inviting the participants who are scholars and other people. And we've done it in IIT, we've done it in India International Center, we've done it in Almora, we've done it in Nainital, we've done it in Jaipur, like that, different places we've done. We've done it in Pune. So the rules of this, the purpose of this was inspired by Needham, who did it for China, 30 volumes on Chinese science and technology. And we felt, this is in the 90s, I felt that nobody had taken on such a huge project for India. We have paper here, paper there, conference here. But if you want to turn it into a curriculum, then if you want to go into universities and teach the history of Indian science and technological development, then you need a corpus of reference works, which are peer-reviewed, very academically sound. So each of these, so the committee, the top people were people like M.G.K. Menon. He is on the editorial board, the advisory board of this project, Kapila Vatsyayan, the late Director General of Archaeological Survey of India, who unfortunately passed away. A lot of people like that. And we decided some ground rules to prevent quackery, because one of the obstacles we faced is a lot of quackery, a lot of exaggeration, a lot of chauvinism can give the legitimate pursuit a bad name. So if you are searching for diamonds and somebody doesn't know the difference between a diamond and a glass, and he's mixed it all up, then even if you got a real diamond, people will say, "Arey, I don't know, maybe it's glass only." It's like that. We want to keep that purity of our work and not mix it up with quackery. So how to differentiate? We made some written rules, and we said, scientist only accepts empirical evidence which is verifiable today. So Pushpak Viman can't be verifiable today because there is no crash site of a Pushpak Viman, there is no landing strip anywhere, there is no physical evidence. Literary evidence does not count in science because literary evidence does not tell you who wrote it, where they wrote it, when they wrote it, was it a fictional idea, was it imaginative, was it really there, were they describing something futuristic. We don't know those things if it's purely literary. Or nuclear bombs in Mahabharata. We said, give me with a Geiger counter proof of a crater which has got nuclear bomb, because if there was a nuclear explosion there would be a crater and there would be physical evidence. So we did not want to be involved in anything like that. However, Harappan tiles you can look at physically with empirical evidence, and you can calculate what temperature is required to produce that kind of tile. So that temperature existed. Steel pillar, late Professor Balasubramanian of IIT Kanpur did the research on steel pillar and was able to show that the rust-proof nature of this, and the steel pillar in Delhi is not the only one, we found 20 other samples across India. The rust-proof is a process of nanotechnology. The very, very thin film, nano-level thin film coating, achieved in a certain process that you can see that coating today. So it's not based on some literary evidence, but based on physical research. So all our volumes are based on very physical, empirically verifiable basis. And we've got in the experts from archaeology and science and technology history. We got every one of our authors is in India. We also wanted this to be an Indian project. I was told by some colleagues, some professor in Harvard, that it'll never work. They'll never be able to produce it, but we produced 9 volumes. We send it overseas for peer review. We send it anywhere in the world, India or overseas, where there is an expert in that field. And this whole thing has been going on very systematically. 9 volumes. There's another 4 or 5 in the pipeline, and a total of 20 that are envisioned. So I would love to, anyone who wants to participate, help us out, take over some volumes, whatever, we are very open-minded people in that. So that's an example. Now what we found there is plenty of evidence that Indian society has not been frozen and fixed once and for all as alleged, but has been progressing. You see metallurgy advancing. You see the Harappan tile technology and city construction advancing from one era to the next to the next. You see medicine advancing. You see agricultural yields and agriculture production know-how advancing. You see the ships developing. So for you look at century after century, you see that the Indians knew the concept of progress. So which is one of the questions that are being raised: do Indians understand progress? Well, and some people doubt that even Indians have a concept of progress because of this stereotype that the Indians were this otherworldly, mystical, did not have concern about this world, and so Westerners are needed to come and solve problems in this world because Indians want to escape from this world. That is not true. And the reason I did this 20 volumes, committed to doing this, is precisely to argue against the thesis that the Indian civilization makes it something that is not progressive, to give you that empirical basis. We've also done many years of funding of Indian psychology. At a time when people did not think such a discipline existed, we pioneered some of the original conferences in Kerala, in Pondicherry, in Calcutta, in Delhi University, and now there exists a discipline called Indian Approaches to Psychology. About 150, 200 faculty members meet regularly and they talk about it. Books have come out, some of them we sponsored. The whole thing started when around just before 2000, I received a grant proposal from IIT Kharagpur. I'll be going back and speaking in the same place February 1st. Yeah, but way back, more than a decade ago, I got a grant proposal that they were about to celebrate their diamond anniversary, diamond jubilee, and they wanted a grant because they were going to do many conferences, and would we like to sponsor one of them. So out of the conferences, I found that there was one called Mind Science. So I said, this is very interesting because I am philosophically oriented and interested in all these models. So I want to sponsor Mind Science. Would you please send me your program itinerary of what will happen, the program schedule. And they sent me a tentative program, and there was not one model of Indian mind or psychology in it. It was all Western thought, all of it. So mostly Western speakers or even Indian speakers, but they're talking about all, Freud, this and Jungian this and all kind of different theories of mind. So I wrote back to them, and I have a copy of this correspondence, saying, I would love to sponsor, but there should be at least one panel on Indian theories of mind, Indian mind science. And I got back a kind of a rude reply, which I kept copy of, which said, sir, we are not chauvinistic, we are scientists, and we are not political people, we believe in secular science. This is the answer I got. So what did I do? I know that Indians have this complex of aping the West. So I have a lot of Western friends who are into this in a very serious way. One professor in Columbia University who is a great Buddhist scholar, and he's initiated and done Buddhist mind science, Buddhist meditation and teaching it. Another one is a neuroscientist who had a guru, Hindu guru for a long time, and he learned many things and wrote books on it, was a well-known scientist. Another is a scholar at Cambridge who was at Cambridge and wrote a book on Patanjali, Yoga Sutra. Another one was in Kundalini. And then there was a scholar of Sri Aurobindo working in the hospitals in New York trying to develop neuroscientific models. So I called all these guys and said, I'd like you to create a panel because they will accept your panel and they will not doubt it because that's how the Indian mind works. But I want one promise from you, that when you go there, do not hide the Indian sources, do not replace the Sanskrit words with some new westernized words, do not fail to talk about how you discovered this in India, who was the master, who was the teacher, what was the meditation technique you learned, how did it help you get an experience of your own mind and your own psychology, how did you utilize it in the West, what do you teach about it in the West, how the West is interested, how they are funding it, what is the use of it. So you have to present like that, and only if you're willing to present like that, I'd like to include you because I don't want them to get even more Eurocentric. Yeah, because one of the things that's happening is models of India are taken to the West, westernized, put in a new context, and then re-exported back to India. Like Gardner is coming and talking about multiple intelligences, but actually Sri Aurobindo's Planes and Parts of Being, where he analyzes that the being consists of many planes and many parts, and each of these needs to be educated and evolved, is the origin of multiple intelligences. And Maslow's is the Panchakoshas, you have the biological layer and the different layers. So one of the projects I started is to figure out how Indian knowledge has gone into the West, sometimes smuggled, sometimes very open, sometimes honest, sometimes little less than honest, how it influenced William James in psychology way back he's considered the founder of modern psychology, but he was influenced by Vivekananda, and also there was a Buddhist scholar, and I went to Harvard and studied all that in the archives, and how since then a whole lot of knowledge systems have gone but been disguised. The Indian sources have been taken out. So what I did in this IIT Kharagpur case is I sent them a proposal with 5 Westerners who were very highly regarded from well-known universities. And now this business of chauvinism, secularism, all that was out, they quickly accepted it. They're so happy that now these guys, wow, these now Westerners are going to tell us, so it must be good, must be good. Maybe we are after all not that bad, because, these guys are using it. So when these guys came, they got standing ovations, which is very good. And then quickly we got in, they all told me that now I've been invited to a conference in Kerala. Somebody said, I've been invited to a conference over there. What do you think? I said, I'll fund it, go. And keep repeating this, because they need to hear it again and again before that, that whole facade of, inferiority complex goes away. So we funded a lot of these projects where we brought Westerners. Then we started discovering Indians. For instance, in Bangalore, you have Sangeeta Menon. She was a young junior post-doc, just finishing her PhD. We picked her up, and we picked up a few such people, and we actually built their career. We funded them year after year and coached them what are the issues that the West claims Indian psychology lacks. The basic issue was that Indian thought is world negating and otherworldly, and this whole modern science of consciousness, which actually was originally derived by quantum physicists who got a lot of inspiration, Schrodinger and Heisenberg, these kind of people, and a whole lot of these guys who wrote Tao of Physics and this diluted kind of stuff. A lot of that inspiration had come from India, but then the consciousness movement disowned, started kind of ignoring anything to do with India, and I wanted to reclaim that. So basically I would fund some young scholars and some conferences. For 8-9 years we did that. My project started on the assumption that such sources exist, but they are not part of the academy in India, because the Indian academy is secular, Western. How to prove, how to introduce it in the Indian academy is a question of getting some Indian academics who are a little more open, getting them familiar, funding them to write these books and do seminars, which is what we did for many years. Matthias we funded for many years, so he did conferences and various people like that, in Pondicherry, and there is one Kiran Kumar in the south somewhere, Mysore, yeah. We funded him for a very long time. Every time he needed to do a conference, we would be the one funding the whole thing, because we felt that if we give good, bright scholars opportunity, and Sangeeta Menon more than anyone else for a very long time, basically telling her, keep pumping out work on one thing after another on this particular theme, and flying her to various foreign countries, sponsoring her, making her a prominent speaker. All that we did, because we wanted that this traditional knowledge, people who are inside the official academic circles in prestigious institutions should bring it in. And I do not feel that I have discovered, or any of our people have discovered, any new Indian psychological procedure or theory that did not already exist. Our job has been merely transfer of know-how from India to India. That's it. It is amazing that, from India to India only. That's all we've done. That's all. We also started a huge program on Indian philosophy at University of Hawaii with Arindam Chakrabarti. That was a very big success. So we planted some seeds, and then we moved on to other things to see how these seeds will flourish, and they have flourished. They are flourishing. People are taking these ideas, and now it's not considered taboo. If you go to Delhi University and say, I want to talk about Indian approaches to psychology, they're not going to laugh you out of this. So in fact, my latest book, Being Different, I presented at Delhi University, and they've accepted it as a textbook for MA. So in 2012, and they bought a whole lot of copies for their library, and in 2012 they're going to teach it. So we had some sponsors who also donated copies for their library so that they can have this. And then that was in November. Then they brought me back for a bigger crowd, bigger audience of more scholars from more places to listen to these alternative ideas. So a decade of such work has made some changes, has brought about some changes. Now I want to, so therefore a lot of the work we are doing which is unpublished, I think can fit somehow or can play a role in some of the things that you've talked about, and we can discuss later how we can pool our ideas together. Now this business of sustainable development has to fit in a bigger context of Indian thought. It cannot be isolated from Indian thought. And to give you an idea what I'm talking about, we are currently in an era where development is synonymous with Western models. These are Western models of development. And Westerners have theorized that this is all a product of what is called the Protestant ethic. Max Weber, famous guy, about 100 years ago, wrote this thesis called the Protestant ethic. That is the term he coined. That it was particularly Protestantism, in England and United States, which had certain philosophical ideas, certain worldviews, certain values, without which capitalism and what we now call the free market economy and modern development would not have been possible. That was his thesis. Of course, Chinese argue that there is an alternative called the Confucian ethic. Chinese have started developing the Confucian ethic, and they are saying that their modernity comes not from the Protestant ethic but from the Confucian ethic. So when they are making factories, the style of values and management is more Confucian, but they're able to make the same gadgets and compete against the West. So they are challenging the West's claim of monopoly over modernity and development by saying there's a Chinese model. And Japanese also for years have said that they are not compromising their civilization. They remain as Japanese as ever and became very modern, and all these cameras like this Sony and whatever, all these technologies in every discipline, Japan became a leader without losing its civilizational ethos, and they did not adopt the Protestant ethic social model in order to develop. So we know at least that the East Asian alternative to the Protestant ethic is a viable one for modernity and development because they're actually doing it. So the question I have been asked many times is there an Indian alternative also? And in 2003, I gave a talk at Indian Institute of Sciences, NIAS. There was a talk I gave called Where is India in the Encounter of Civilizations? Basically talking about in the China, US, at that time China was not as prominent, but I predicted it would be. In this different civilizational exchanges and competition going on, is there an Indian position also? And that has then developed into further talks. And this first book is one of 7 volumes I'm doing on this theme, on Indian thought, Indian civilization, and its place in the world, and a comparative between Indian thought and other civilizational models as they apply to practical situations. And the practical situations I'm going to deal with are all kinds of situations, from management and governance and sustainability and so on and so forth, psychological development, consciousness, and all those kind of things. So the primary characteristics of this Protestant ethic, which is called the Western model, is that the world is seen as anthropomorphic, which means human-centric, my-centric. Man was given the world, the earth was made for man's raw material, for man's pleasure. God made the earth for man's pleasure. Whereas our model says that the God manifested as the world, so the cosmos is actually divine. So cosmos is not dead material for me to use and exploit, and development is not turning the raw material into finished things for man's needs, because cosmos has its own rights. It's not that just there are human rights, but there is also ecological rights. The ecosystem has its own rights. The Western idea of environmentalism is very recent. It started in the 60s and 70s when they started running out of raw material, like oil, suddenly oil crisis. And people started talking about limits to growth, and that can we keep growing forever. Buckminster Fuller and all these guys have started, and then other people took it on more seriously. So the Western idea of sustainability and environmentalism is actually human selfish. It says, I'm concerned about the environment because it will affect me adversely if I don't. If the water system is polluted, then the fish will die, my economy will suffer. If the air is polluted, it will create health, again we will suffer. Yeah? If we use too much energy, then we'll run out of energy and we will suffer. So it is not as if it is done for the sake of the environment itself. it is not that the environment is there is a certain consciousness and a certain being that has its own rights. It is that I have rights, and the environment is something I can use, and I better not use it too much or use it incorrectly. It's sort of like my property, and I better look after my property. So it is human centric and not cosmos centric. Now, unfortunately, there has been a lot of mimicry by Indians, and I don't want to go into the history of why it happened and all that. We all know that quite well. After independence, it probably accelerated. After independence, the mimicry, the Indians becoming the Gora Saab and taking over the clubs. You go to all the old clubs, the Chelmsford Club and this golf club, and you can see just everybody. It's so artificial. It's like Indians sort of doing the white man's job. I mean, it's sort of silly almost. And it's getting worse because I come from St. Stephen's College, and I must tell you that I'm the odd guy out, because when I go to these meetings and gatherings of my college mates, and they're all into this high class American living and trying to project that image, I'm the guy who's critiquing it and trying to find alternatives that are Indian models. And they all think I'm strange and weird and something wrong with me, because why am I wasting my time? That's sort of their attitude. So at least sitting in Delhi, I'll tell you, maybe Bangalore is different, but sitting in Delhi, things are actually getting more Eurocentric and more westernized among the Indians. Now, the problem with this is, first, it is not achievable by Indians to become American developed. Because if you look at, we have 1/3 the amount of land, actually less than 1/3 of the amount of land, and more than 3 times the population. So our population density is 10 times. 10 times. So if we want automobile density per 100 population, if we want automobiles in India to be at the level of America, we will need so many cars that India will become a parking lot. This is my prediction. That if you keep developing, then they'll say 6 lanes not enough, we need 12 lanes, then they'll say we need 50 lanes. So then everybody will just sitting there with using it as an air conditioner to sit there, and then it'll become like that, It's just a weird thing. How can you have such a huge automobile density? So we have to think like, is this the right model at all? It's a foolish idea to try and mimic them. Maybe we need to put all this money, instead of big highways and a lot of car factories, we need to put it into mass transit, like China is doing, and have 50 cities and say, okay, in 10 years they'll have a metro. And should we put this infrastructure, instead of building very proudly the national highways network, should we build a water grid? If we build a water grid, it's a bottom-up development. It will affect the 500 million people at the lower end of the strata and create a huge food production and bring economy where it is needed, and self-sufficiency, management of our water. So I doubt that this automobile-driven American lifestyle is viable. Second problem with this is it is not scalable. So if 50 million people, like many of the guys I know in Delhi, live that life, some are billionaires, the point is it is not scalable to 2 billion, because there will be 2 billion Indians by the end of the century. That's the prediction now. So if 50 million can achieve something, you have to ask, is it scalable to 2 billion? And if it is not scalable to 2 billion, it will result in social unrest. You will have the haves and the have-nots, and they will not put up with this nonsense that some people are more privileged than others. And these haves and have-nots will no longer be, Brahmins are privileged and Dalits are not, because then there will be billionaire Dalits also. And this will be based on who's got BMWs and fancy cars and who doesn't. Yeah. So this will not be the old Indian caste baggage as a criteria for the conflict, but a new line of who are the haves and who are the have-nots is being defined right now in India. And so what is not scalable is a kind of treadmill. It's a kind of you're going down the wrong path, because the more you get addicted to this and you're not able to get your end result using it, the bigger the problem, bigger the hole you're digging for yourself. And then the next problem is, it is not sustainable even if it could be achieved. So even if India could achieve this very westernized style of development, imagine the amount of foreign oil you'll have to import. I have proposed that Nano, what Ratan Tata should be asked to do is that this nano car, he should package the nano with 5-year supply of oil or petroleum, and say whether I have to buy it, wherever I get it from, is my job, but I'll give you a certain price for whatever it takes to drive up to 10,000 miles a year, or whatever the average is. Instead of saying it will cost 1 lakh or whatever, I'm going to charge you, I'm going to give you a guaranteed price for driving it also, the energy price. Now, if he were to do that, then he is taking the risk of what happens to the energy scarcity. Whatever it costs him, he has to buy that many billions of gallons and supply to you, and that would be like a turnkey from the time you buy the car and all the things you need to run it for at least so many years, he is going to guarantee. Now that would be a different, then the whole game will change. Then, then they'll say, oh no, we need an electric car instead. Because, you see, then they'll think differently. But it is somebody else's problem. He thinks his car is done. Now oil is somebody else's problem, but actually it is his problem because he's creating the problem. It's just like when you sell a bottle of Coke, the guy should be in charge of disposing of the waste, the waste produced. It should be a responsibility. And in some cities in the US, it is so that you have to pay a certain amount of tax for every bottle of Coke you're selling, and when it is recovered in the waste, you get that recovery back. How you recover it, your problem. You have to arrange that it is recycled. So the person who is producing something with a side effect, collateral damage to the environment or to anything, has to be paying the price of that also. Yeah. So if you were to make the rule that anyone who is supplying something has to pay the price of the energy used for that, and then he has the incentive of making it more efficient. He has the incentive of buying that energy. So then you have a comprehensive economic model, rather than, okay, I only make cars and I don't worry about anything else. You see? So I feel that this Americanization is a very serious problem. Now, if you replace it, if you replace the Protestant ethic on the one side and the Confucian ethic on the other side, and I'm writing a book on this, by the way. I'm writing a book on comparing alternative models of leadership, sustainability, governance, and I've been researching this for a very long time, different models that exist and where is the Indian model fit, and this book will come out soon. If you look at the dharmic worldview, the Indian civilizational worldview, it is based on very different premises. First, it is not based on consumerism. The idea that to be happy you have to keep consuming and you have to keep buying more gadgets and more external things is not the classical Indian idea of a good life and a blissful life. So you have to develop the inner being. You have to develop the inner being from childhood, a whole new system of education, where basically my joy and my bliss is less dependent on external things. So this is a very important part of the development process if you want to use an Indian model. And so this whole business of desire management through our yoga and various sadhanas and various spiritual practices is a very central part of the Indian sustainability. Because if Americans who are 300 million cannot sustain the environment of such a huge land continent, then we with 10 times the density got no chance. So we have to think very much out of the box. Then you look at we have an ashram system where there's different stages in life. And a student lives a very frugal life. He's not a very consumerist. He's not chasing the latest things like today the westernized Indian kids are. But when you are in grihast, you can have a good materialistic life. You can have comfort. It is not denial. But it is for a certain period of time. After that, you leave that and you go into serving other people. You return back to society, philanthropy. You do social good. You look for the higher good. And then again, you're not a consumerist. You're sort of downsizing your consumption. And then later on, when you're looking for your own enlightenment and your own self-actualization, you're certainly not dependent on consumerism. And this whole business depends on the concept of Swadharma, which is a very decentralized intelligence. Swadharma means it's not centralized top-down, some institution, God gave some commandments or some edicts to some group, one group of privileged people, highly centralized, and they have a franchise to spread it around all over the world. It's not like that. It's that the divine is manifested in everyone, and everyone has the potential of on their own, without dependence on any authority or any institution, achieving this. So this idea of Swadharma, which Gandhi used a lot, that every human being has this unique potential, which is their own potential, which you should not be copying someone else's Swadharma, but following your own. This is a very different model. And the idea of, sometimes I talk about, Indian decentralized structures. And I was at the Kumbh Mela, and the guest of Swami Abdeshanand Giri, who is the head of the Naga Sadhus. So he had invited me to stay with them. It was a great experience for me to be with this sort of thing. So I went, and that's another story, what all happened. It was very fantastic. But as I was leaving, my taxi is waiting outside, saying my goodbyes to my host, Swami Abdeshanand Giri. So right then there was an American TV crew who were making a documentary on Kumbh Mela. So they were asking him questions, interviewing him. It was being finished. And so Swamiji said, there's this man, Rajiv Malhotra, you should interview him also now, because, he's come from US, maybe he'll tell you also something. So they interviewed me. And they said, we need only 5 minutes of your time. We are taking 5-minute clips from a lot of people for the last month. And we need 5 minutes. But what I said to them turned into a 3-hour interview. And when they showed this on ABC, ABC has a show called Sunday Morning. It's a very popular show. When they showed it, most of their Kumbh Mela documentary was my discussion only. And that's because I told them things which normally Indians don't have the courage to tell them. Most Indians, they had talked to. They had apologized for all this dirt and confusion and chaos and all that. Most Indians they talked to were talking like that. Their question that they had asked everybody was, when we go back to America, we have to explain to Americans what is the meaning of all this chaos. This is the question. So he said, we asked everybody, what is the meaning of all this chaos? So, sir, what do you say? So I gave a very interesting, a different answer from what they were expecting. So I said, the chaos is your mind having cognitive overload, which means you can handle only up to a certain amount. The American mind can handle information up to a certain amount of complexity, a certain amount of diversity, and as long as things are within that, which means they're neat, tidy, linear, predictable, no uncertainty, rules like that, then for you it is order, and your mind is built on order and a certain concept of order. If the amount of complexity is hugely large and things are happening that are totally out of the box and they violate your norms, and the amount of they are unpredictable and lots of things going on, that is, your system crashes. You have a system crash because you can't cognize it. You cannot deal with so much. And that state or that fear it is going to happen is what you call chaos. So chaos is your mind. It's your mind's inability to cognize this. So I said, the guy who's taking this bath, this guy who's walking there, this guy who's eating something, this guy who's brushing his teeth, this guy who's doing whatever he's doing, they don't feel chaotic. The participants in this do not feel chaotic. And I did not feel chaotic. I had no sense of chaos doing whatever I did there, which is quite amazing stuff that I experienced. But when you come in, you are looking for something, you are projecting that expectation, and this doesn't fit it, so you're calling it chaos. So then they're very interested. They wanted to know, why are we like that? He's a smart guy, he was. So I told him the whole history of the West, which I've written in this book also, the chapter 3 is called Order and Chaos. That's the title of chapter 3. And it explains, and this Manthan, which is in the cover of the book, is also order chaos kind of interaction between the two to create. So this business is a very Indian characteristic of decentralized organizations. In the Kumbh Mela, I told him, I said, this keeps happening every year, every so often, based on some astronomical things that all these people find all over the country. They come in their tents and they set up their stuff and they all do this, and then they dismantle their townships and go back, and then again after so many years they come. And you know, there's no event manager. I told him, there's no event manager. He said, oh really? There's no event manager. There's no headquarters. There's no schedule like you have given a schedule of what will happen here. There's nobody who's organized that, okay, then you will do this, you will do that. Everybody does what they want to do. So this is a very amazing thing for Western construct of what is a development, you know. So this Kumbh Mela is a huge example of an Indian idea of going on development continuity, but it is becoming sophisticated also. You know, these people are putting up very massive tents. Some of these tents have toilets and they have bathroom. They have they're very fancy stuff. In fact, I checked out of the hotel to live in that because it's more comfortable. So some of the tents are actually more comfortable. So the Indian idea, the Indian ethos is based on a metaphysics of the cosmology of the universe, and that metaphysics and cosmology of the universe is premised on decentralization of intelligence. And the West is premised on centralization of intelligence, because the universe is nothing but is dead matter that somehow through molecules, magic of molecules begin to have life, and then God sort of creates it and so on. So the idea of this, trees don't have souls, animals don't have souls. You see, it's very different from our idea that when we say Vasudeva Kutumbakam, we also include those guys. It's not just human beings, by the way. Vasudeva is not only human beings, it is also all these things. So it's a very different idea. So this so decentralized, so complex, and worlds within worlds within worlds, so many contexts that exists, is very alien to the Western mind, which is simple. God runs the world with 10 commandments. Now, I don't think you could run your institution with only 10 rules. Nobody can run such a complex thing with just few rules. I mean, come on, this has to be very complex rather than that. And also empowers a particular organization or a particular group, so institution, to take this frozen fixed knowledge and spread it all over the world. Exclusive franchise. Exclusive. What a big deal. You got an exclusive franchise. So you go around saying, I got the franchise. You don't. That's how it is. So there's a power structure there. So we also kept our Shrutis and Smritis separate. So the Shruti can keep developing. We are not frozen and fixed in a book. You see, not one canon, one critical edition. So these are some of the ingredients which are very different, and the books I'm writing now are taking advantage. So I've explained these differences in the book, in the first book, but not done applications. Now I'm going to write applications for it. So I will not take too much of your time, because I think I want to hear what other people have to say. But I want to close with one caveat, and that is that my work on Indian knowledge systems and what I call Dharma civilization or classical Indian civilization is not to be confused with modern politics. It's not to be confused with modern politics. Often it is. And when we do that, we do ourselves a disservice. Yes, there is people who are politically appropriating, but we can disregard that. We can say, okay, you can't appropriate me. I'm in it for the knowledge system, and I don't want to be appropriated by this camp or that camp or that camp. And a lot of people try to figure out where you fit politically. And I don't like that, and I think that is actually a hindrance to free thinking. We need free thinking. So if somebody believes in, Newtonian physics, that's a knowledge system, and somebody believes in an alternative physics, it's got nothing to do with politics, it's a certain knowledge system. And you can reason, you can look at the facts, and you can choose whether you like this Indian knowledge system, whether you like Confucian knowledge system, whether you like the Protestant ethic. It's got nothing to do with modern politics of religion. And I don't want to turn this into modern religion. I don't think religion is dharma anyway. So with that caveat, I will close, and I'm delighted to be here, and would love to find ways that we can work together. Thank you.
I'm KG Gayatri, working in the institute, currently attached to the Center for Ecological Economics and Natural Resources. should I say, I'm still a student of sociology development studies, but after the keynote address, I'm probably puzzled as to say that whatever has been researched, should I go beyond that and look again of whatever? It was very, very illuminating.
Thank you.
K.V. Raju, Professor, Center for Ecological Economics and Natural Resources in ISEC. Currently, for the last 4 years, I've been Economic Advisor to the Chief Minister in Government of Karnataka. And what you said is very interesting. In fact, both in ISEC, this is a second workshop, it happened here, and also in the DF discussions. Is there a possibility to explore, in collaboration with your fund, so that we can build India, China, and US collaboration, and ISEC, if the director permits, can run a short-term course for both the young researchers and also for the seniors. Based upon the demand, they can always divide that into separate groups. Because right now, the Center for Ecological Economics and Natural Resources, the faculty are all here, they've been doing the Nordic countries course for research methodology. For them, 30 students come every year, paid course, fully paid course.
They come here.
They come here.
And you teach them what?
Research methodology in natural resources.
Okay.
Okay? And we also take them to the field work. This is about 6 weeks and 4 weeks courses. But this upcoming thing, in a more structured manner, with a lot of material that your foundation has been producing, I'm sure others foundations may also produce a similar thing. But building this kind of a relationship between India and China and US with your foundation, and if ISEC can host it, designing and running it in a long-term course with both your foundation and the DF with ISEC would be a good opportunity for us.
Now this is very good. What I'd like to compliment you for a very visionary kind of idea. If a institutional mechanism in India is available as a host and funding is available, my foundation can certainly arrange Chinese thinkers along these lines who are developing Confucian modernity and Confucian ethic based civilizational models, development models as an alternative to the West. And that, I think, could be a very good event to have, because you will then have an India-China exchange where the Chinese are actually ahead of Indians by 20 years in their critique of the Western model and replacing it with their own. And I tell you, I was raised in St. Stephen's, and it's a hotbed of Marxists and subaltern studies and Naxalite movements and all those things. So a critique of the West existed. But the critique of the West which was going on was a critique using imported methodologies like Marxism and like subaltern studies, and not an Indian civilizational model to critique the West. So while they built a good base of telling you what the colonialists did wrong, all these post-colonial scholars, they were not able to replace it with something concrete alternative. You see, Chinese, on the other hand, were doing their idea of post-colonial or their idea of Western critique, but clearly and solidly from their own background of civilization, without the shame that the Indians carried about the Indian civilization. And I used to point this out in the 1980s, nobody was willing to listen, and in the 1990s, that China's approach to asserting itself is not only on the material plane of economic development and industry and all that, but also on a civilizational plane of rediscovering and taking on the West as an equal. And India will be left behind, because India's relationship to the West either is the one extreme where we accept them as the boss and the superior, or at the other extreme where we knock them down, but not from a very authentic study of our own point of view. It's a knockdown from a very kind of kind of reaction and cynicism point of view. And the Chinese are, every time I would discuss with a Chinese scholar who says this is an idea of the West, Chinese, for them to study Protestant ethic very systematically from the point of view of Confucian ethic is a remarkable achievement. Nobody here did that. Nobody here said what would be such and such scholars' critique of Western development, such and such Indian scholar, such and such Indian scholar. All these postmodernists are disconnected from their own roots. and you know, they're just sort of, they are products of Western imported ideas. So their critique of the West in post-colonial studies is a kind of West self-critique being replicated by Indians, parroted by Indians. It's not original, nothing original in there. So I think a very good step would be if all the other things can be arranged here, and my job is to get to work on what the program should be and to find the right kind of experts. There are some pretty well-known, pretty good people I know who would be happy to come in, and they are also looking for an interaction with Indians. Chinese are actually quite interested in an interaction with Indians. Indians have not done that, but they're quite interested. So if you are interested as ISEC, send me a note. If there are, but if you know, I can arrange that end of it. But all the stuff here, you know, we need a good host organization.
Actually, I think a month or two back, I happened to give a CD containing nearly 150 200 documents.
Yeah.
One of the documents in that is a huge book on ancient India's contributions on chemistry.
If a chemistry process is described in a text, then the modern empirical methodology can be applied to validate it. If we can reproduce the text, reproduce the process, and get the result predicted, then we can say that whoever wrote that text knew about chemistry, that particular chemistry. And then that kind of a thing belongs in our empirical research methodology. Correct. In the case of aeronautics, if we neither have a actual sample of that plane available today, nor has anybody tried to replicate and make a plane in accordance with the recipe, the aeronautical theory, make a plane according with it, try and fly it, and see if it produces that velocity and all those properties which were produced. In other words, verifiability has to be there. And so scientific method requires verifiability. Now, when I started this project, I wanted to, first 20 volumes, like a pyramid foundation, have to be impeccable beyond refutation. So I said we'll only go with things that we can verify. And we know there is much more knowledge, but we have to do work to verify it. We still have to do work to verify it. And I fully believe funding should be there to verify those things. But until we have verified it, we are not prepared to make the claim, otherwise we get discredited. So we have to say that the level of credibility goes from absolutely solid proof to plausible and likely to speculative but still worth pursuing to we don't know. It has to be all across. So this is my answer there.
Thank you for your excellent presentation. What I was saying is that, like you mentioned, that in the St. Stephen's College, where everybody, the present model of development is the Western model of development, and it is also that this model is being projected and being accepted at an accelerated growth, rate of acceptance by people. In that situation, how do we put a halt to it, or how do we start containing this? Otherwise, we have to wait for a very long period when all the resources are over everything. So, what is the best way? Because the system, people are coming through a system of education.
No, I will answer that. So, the question is a very important question, because the other side, which is accelerating the Western model, has been working at it for a very long time, and they have the backing of all kind of big Western authorities and funding and whatnot, and the prestige associated with it. So we are just sort of at the drawing board starting. So by the time we get somewhere, it may be over. So this means you have to have aggressive intervention, surgical intervention. Doctor has to say the disease is at an advanced stage, and just eating vitamins is not going to work. I have to do some surgery. I have to get involved. So my surgical intervention is an intellectual intervention, but of a very dramatic provocation. I will tell you what it is. I am developing something I call the U-turn theory, which some of you have heard of. U-turn theory says that the Westerners go through an intellectual U-turn, which goes through 5 stages. Stage 1, They come to India and they learn a lot. They get initiated, they put on Indian clothes, they have Indian name, they live somewhere, and they become more Indian than most Indians are. And some of them stay there. A lot of such people are in Auroville. Some move on to stage 2, where they remove the Indian context, generic knowledge. They say it's found everywhere. There's nothing Indian about it. So why do we have to reference any Indian source? And it is found everywhere. Or they say it is my own original knowledge. And I've tracked a lot of Westerners who are doing this in various disciplines and for the last 150 years. And I've been doing this research on the U-turn theory. This will be my 6 more volumes coming after this, is on this particular thing. The appropriation of Indian knowledge, recharacterizing it as West, removing the Indian sources. And I've done by discipline. There are several disciplines in which this is happening. Each discipline will be separate volume. Anybody want to help me, please help me, because I have so much material. I want to get these books out, and those who are interested should contact me, and I would love to work together. So then the third stage, either the same Westerner or his followers. Sometimes it's not Jung who went into these stages, but Jung went up to a point, and then his followers went further. So the third stage is when it is Westernized. Now it is no longer generic universal knowledge. Now they'll trace it back to Plato or Kant or Wittgenstein or Derrida or some linguist or mathematician or some Western source is created. So the Indian source is removed, and in stage 2, and in stage 3 Western source is created. Now it becomes part of Western history. It becomes part of Western history. And stage 4 is that the Indian source is sometimes denigrated. That is something inferior, something primitive, it was deficient. So actually a part of Western history is better. Making it part of Western history is better because it was not going to be progressive and advanced and all that as part of Indian trajectory. And then the worst thing is stage 5. This knowledge is then re-exported to India. So Gardner U-turning and re-exporting his multiple intelligences is a living example because he's speaking at Infosys nowadays. Now, the interesting thing is that just like I went to IIT Kharagpur and I could get 5 white guys to talk about Indian psychology, and they were very happy to have that, but I could not say that, I could not go to some traditional matha and have them give a lecture on Indian psychology. They would never accept it. Same way, I'm sure if I went to Infosys and I said, we'll get an expert from Sri Aurobindo to talk about planes and parts of being and its application to multiple intelligences and integral education, they'll say, no, we are secular and all that. They'll talk like that. Yeah. So now the way I intend to play a role, this is to answer your question, is when I confront the Indians that this great knowledge that you have of Gardner is Sri Aurobindo knowledge, it shocks them. They can't believe it because they become so invested in that. They become so invested that this is part of their Western identity, the Westernized identity that Indians have. Indians are trying to mimic the West and they feel that they're on a certain project. And here comes this guy who slides the rug from under their feet and says that, no, you're not really becoming Westernized because this is actually part of your own heritage that you've forgotten. So this is a technique to get them back. The U-turn is a technique to reverse the U-turn, get things back. So I have managed to do this in certain disciplines. I've managed to do this. For instance, one of my volumes which I want to do very soon will be on psychology, the whole history of Western psychology and the Indian influences in it. In order to inject a further boost into the Indian psychology movement, that you are Westernizing rapidly, but you should actually take this knowledge and reconnect it back to your source because that is where the Westerner got it from. And if you reconnect it back to the roots, you can actually take it further. You should be teaching him rather than him teaching you. So this re-empowerment of Indians has to be done discipline by discipline. You see, this can be done in many disciplines where the traditional Indian knowledge has not been sufficiently understood. So the Westerners got one dose of it, and to them it's enough, and they made a big career out of it. But there's many more things to discover. So by doing this U-turn theory, I'm identifying the 10, 15, 20 major areas of Western civilization which actually are Indian. You see, like linguistics. the whole origin of linguistics. Who are the major Western linguists from Humboldt on to Saussure and all these guys in between? I've looked at every single one of them, and their deep knowledge of Sanskrit and their deep involvement with Sanskrit theories to see the origin of Western linguistics in the 1900s and early 20th century and the Sanskrit from Panini. So once I've written that, then I go to the Indians who are Eurocentric and Westerners and in that field and challenge them and say that you should be teaching this rather than teaching the Western source. You see my point? So this is my shock therapy idea of how to do this very quickly. And that's why I want to get this U-turn series out very quickly, so then I can take it to these very self-alienated Indian elite in the academy and shock and challenge them into debate and say, okay, I can show you T.S. Eliot got most of his major poems from the Upanishads. I can show you that. But you are happy to study T.S. Eliot and very proud that you can recite and memorize T.S. Eliot, but you are not able to go further back to his own sources because you are embarrassed of those. So this is how I think we can interfere with this very fast-moving trade.
As you were mentioning about Howard Gardner, next month we are planning a 2-day workshop based on Natya Shastra, psychological aspects or insights from Natya Shastra, where in the second circular that we have circulated, we have mentioned that Professor Bharat Gupta will demonstrate how the multiple intelligent concept has been taken from Natya Shastra, where we have Angika, Satvika, Arya and all these things. So that's one. And a question is, intellectually fine, we agree that we had a developmental model and it was sustainable, if at all it existed. But isn't it that it's like seeing is believing? Can we experiment in a place where we can know that this actually can work, an operational model, maybe on a small scale or anything, and then see that it is scalable and it can be extended? Are there some experiments going on in this direction, or is it too early to?
No, I will answer that also. So this is in Jain University?
Jain University.
What's your name?
Vinay Chandra.
Vinay Chandra. This is very good. Can you get me a copy of that, what is done?
Sure.
Yeah?
I think you know Bharat Gupta.
I know Bharat Gupta,
Yeah, he's coming over to Bangalore, 13th and 14th of February.
but I won't be here. So can you get me a copy of his presentation?
Sure.
Or
Send you a recording or whatever.
if you can,
Yeah.
I really appreciate it because it'll help my research. Yeah. So you have my email and you can do that. So let me answer that. You see, when you look at neuroscience research, the Westerners who have appropriated have done us a great service because they validated it. They've done a huge amount of research. I've been going around National Institute of Mental Health and Mayo Clinic and MIT labs and all kind of places have been doing this research on yogis and Tibetan Buddhist meditators for 25-30 years. And I've got somebody who collects bibliography of all of this, and we got a huge bookcase full of all this material. We're scanning it and researching it. And invariably, the subject is an Indian or a Tibetan. The measurement guy who's doing the MRI is a Westerner. He claims discovery of the theory, whereas actually the yogi is the discoverer of the theory. If you think about it, it's like what I tell them is like it's like somebody runs a 100-meter dash and he's the fastest runner, and the medal goes to the guy with the stopwatch who measured it. I mean, it's silly like that. It's like that. So when these guys say I discovered it, I raise my hand and I get a lot of notoriety for that. I get hit with all kind of people, but you have to be courageous, So I raise my hand. I say that the person who achieved that state of consciousness, which is in your MRI, he should be given this prize. He should be the author of this paper, at least a co-author of this paper. His name is not even mentioned. He's called a subject. That's what he's called, subject. It's a very insulting thing. It means the yogi, who is a highly accomplished guy, is become a subject of some guy with a machine who can measure it and get some paper out of it. So how to get back our revenge is very honest, very straightforward. We connect it back to our tradition, and all that measurement data is our proof. It's like, when China leased Hong Kong to to England for 99 years. When the lease was expiring, China wanted it back. And so England said, what about all the improvements we've made? We built all these buildings, banks. There are $1 trillion in the banks now. The economy is worth so much. We can't move it. So you compensate us for it. China said, nothing doing. Whatever is fixed in the ground stays here. So this is what you do when a squatter comes to your land and he builds a wall and all that, he makes some improvement, levels it. When you kick out the squatter, that improvement belongs to the landowner. So I, taking back my heritage from the U-turners, am also getting the benefit of all the improvements they've made. And they are smart guys, they've made some improvements. They've made a lot of improvements, particularly in scientific validation. So your question, how do we scientifically validate it? This is why those areas which have been U-turned are the most practical to take back, because others have done work for us. Those areas they have not U-turned, we got to do work. We got to do some modern validation using science. Those areas they have not U-turned, we got to do work. We got to do some modern validation using science.
Can we have one last question?
That lady there had a...
She is.
In fact, these are not questions, but maybe just thoughts which started bothering me. 4 of them. The first is when you were speaking of Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism, and you also said in a different context that you don't intend to say anything on the politics of Dharma, etc. And China having its own Confucius model, etc. Max Weber visited China and India also. So have you looked at, of course, Mr. Shivaram Krishnan is more well-read than me, but my understanding is when he writes on this Protestant ethic, what is documented about China and India there, because Weber also wrote on sociology of religion quite a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Are you looking into that critique of Weber also?
Sure.
Is just one, because something very unsettling thought is when China would do that and not so much in the case of India. Of course, there are other countries which followed the Chinese model of the so-called Communist Party. Is there a role of the long-drawn political ideology there, which made China to take the courage and say it, while perhaps India with the socialist model, also following USSR, another communist big giant, but where did, within quotes, we fail there? If at all we wanted such a model of our own,
Yes.
What was just puzzling?
Okay, those are 2 questions. Okay.
And secondly, regarding the U-turn theory, it's a submission that you keep in your view the diaspora of our India, who are in US.
Yes.
Because I think they are really, I don't mean the entire lot, if there are 100, at least I'm sure 20 are doing this, that they are showing what India is, living in the various US cities. It may be competing in the job market, it may be having their own, for example, very, in a very lighter way, building their own Raghavendra Mathas or Venkateshwara temples or whatever it is. But I think that feeling of surviving in the midst of a very big wave of tsunami of whatever isms which are going on there. I think let us not go back only to Rajneesh or Mahesh Yogi, but even for example, the software people or the MBAs or even the women who go to join their husbands, I think they continue their Varalakshmi Vratas or they do whatever a little bit. So I think they have their own contribution, and I think that should be included in your volume.
Let me answer these 2 questions.
Just one point.
Okay.
I think it is all related.
Right.
The ashramas and other worldview you presented, and please don't put me in the basket of such people who always bring in the gender issue, bring in the Dalit and subaltern. No, not from that perspective. But the entire worldview, there is no place for women there. Sita followed, Draupadi had the polyandry insult on her, or whatever. So where is the woman in the entire thing? Because we always stop at the Brahmanas and say that everything was very fine in the early Vedic period. Only after the Brahmanas, there were Gargi, Apala, Lopamudra, Maitri, everyone who participated in seminars. But why do we blame the invasions? Because we also gained by the at least early invasions.
Okay, I'll answer these three questions. Can I answer? Yeah. So yeah. Unwinding. Okay. So these are three excellent questions. So let me answer them. Weber's critique of India is certainly something that one has to counter, because he made a lot of assumptions. I mean, he and Marx and all these, this mode of what was it called? They came up with very negative, derogatory, very reductionist idea of India and China, which these guys had. And so a critique of that is necessary, because they were doing it from a certain point of view. They had a certain spin and a certain hegemony. They were doing it from that point of view, and they were picking and choosing what would fit that critique, dismiss it, and claim that the Protestant ethic was the only way for all these developments to happen. Now, China's political ideology, yes, China's political ideology it was part of their philosophy to base it on a very sort of first they took Marxism from Soviets, then more recently they took capitalism from United States by setting up all these industries. But they decided that we do not want to become known as a copycat Westerner, because we will never be equal to them and never be able to surpass them, because they'll always be able to say you took our model and we control the essence of it. So they want to connect it to Confucian ideas, Confucian ways of governance, Confucian society, collective thinking rather than individual thinking, that sort of thing. So in that sense, politics is there. When I said I do not want to connect it with politics, I don't want to connect it with BJP and Congress and CPM and Mayawati and this and that. I do not want to connect it with contemporary Indian politics. It doesn't mean that the relationship of development with political thought is irrelevant. That is certainly to be brought in. But I do not want to be part of any camp. I am equally concerned and offended by all of them, frankly. Yeah, frankly. Because I think there's a serious problem in the political ethos today of all the parties without exception. And so I just don't want it to be branded. That's my point. Second question, diaspora. Now, clearly I know them very well. I'm pretty prominent speaker at diaspora events. Diaspora can be divided into 3 or 4 ways of segmenting it. One way of reaching the diaspora is through temples. And I go to temples on a regular basis. Just yesterday, Mohan and I were at a gathering, and the temple in Memphis wants to come and invite me and have a huge gathering. And so I'm doing this all the time. I'm a speaker next month with the Chinmaya Mission in Washington. So I understand the temple movement in the US. The second classification of diaspora is through region of India. So there is a Telugu association, there's a Tamil association, there's a Rajasthan association, there's a Bengali association, Gujarati association. And I've gone and spoken in a lot of these. So I've gone to the Telugu and I've gone to the Rajasthan, like that, Bengali, I've spoken there. So I understand that movement also. They're trying to preserve a certain language-based culture of a region very nicely. The third diaspora, this way of segmenting the diaspora and channel to reaching them is professional. So Indian physicians have a big organization. Indian hotel owners have a big organization. TIE, which is for IT kind of people, the big organization. So there are different professional organizations of Indians. Yeah. So these are 3 ways. The spiritual, religious, guru and sampradaya type of movements is one. The regional language-based movements is another one. And the modern professional movements is another one. I'm involved in all 3 of these. And every year I go give a lot of talks, and I certainly understand them very well. So it's not like I don't know that. It is the study of the diaspora is a separate topic by itself. It is a separate topic by itself. And how the diaspora is, first generation is a certain way, second generation is a little different. Those who are born and raised there are a little different. You go to an American college, typically the Indians who are undergraduate are born and raised in the United States, and the Indians who are PhD students are typically from here. And they are different. They don't even interact with each other. And this question of identity is Indian identity is stronger in the ones who are from India. Their identity is rooted. And the question of identity is mixed up in the people who are born and raised there. My kids are born and raised there. I've gone and really examined this whole area. So that is a very complex issue. The issue of Indian identity in the diaspora is also dependent on which country. So in Trinidad and Fiji, it's a very strong because they're less assimilative. In England, it's different. In America, it's different. In Hong Kong, it's different. So there is no one diaspora value you can have everywhere. In Dubai, it's different. The kind of Indian and the kind of identity they have is very different. So there's many nuances and taxonomy. The taxonomy of Indian diaspora is complex, and I've put that together. But I do not want to mix it with the U-turn theory. The U-turner is a Westerner. It is the Westerner's journey. And in this book, I call them the journeymen. It is the journeyman or woman who goes on this journey of India, comes back. Why he comes back? Why can't he go all the way and just remain there? Why does he feel at some point that something is not right? It did not work out. What disillusioned him, disappointed him? What pulls him back? What is the attractiveness of going back and marketing all this stuff in his own name, becoming his own guru, that kind of thing? So the U-turn theory is the journey of the Western journeyman, his social psychology and personal psychology, and in the process, the journey of ideas, the journey of Indian ideas, how they move back there. It is not about the diaspora. Okay, so that's a separate topic of research, which I understand is very important, but I don't want to mix these up. Okay, the third question was woman not found in the classical Indian tradition with equal rights. Now, when I say, and I agree with that, when I say that we are trying to look at what are the civilizational resources, like Western civilizational resources in the Protestant ethic, like Confucian civilizational resources, and like our civilizational resources, none of these as starting point is perfect. The Protestant ethic also got all these same problems. They also have the same problem, whether it's women, slavery, genocide of Native Americans, all kind of things they've done. Confucians also agree. But the point is they all want to modernize from a certain starting point. So it's not that during the time of Confucian everything was perfect and China wants to go back to live like Confucian. Not so. They want to be modern and have modern amenities and modern technology and modern society. Similarly, the Protestant ethic doesn't say you go back to the time of Martin Luther in Germany and live like that and give up all the progress that has been made. In the same manner, why is it that when we talk about using dharmic civilization as a foundation, why is it that people assume that we want to go back? We don't want to go back. In fact, I would say that a civilization which was designed for a population of 20 million, I don't know what was the population, but couldn't be more than 20 million. During Gandhi's time, 100 years ago, he talks about India, which include Pakistan and Bangladesh, as having 300 million. Yeah, now it's 4 times. So if you go back, probably during the Mughal period, it was 100 million people, 150 million people. If you still keep going back, I think during the Vedic period, maybe 20 million people. So how can you take the sustainability model of 20 million people in the subcontinent and apply it to sustainability of 2 billion people, 100 times that? You cannot. So you cannot take old models and wish we go back, because then you'll have to downsize your population 98%. You have to really downsize people down to 20 million. You know, you can't scale down. So how much wood they used for yagna? You have to ask the question, how much wood they used for cremation? You have to ask the question, if you had 20 million people, you could do certain things. Can you do all those things without deforestation when you have 2 billion people? These are important questions to ask. And we should be courageous, and it doesn't mean that we have doubt in our dharma. The dharma is a foundation on which we are building up the future, and we have to see what will take forward and what we have to leave behind. We have to be able to do that. So the reason we can do it is the separation of Shruti and Smritis. Because our Smritis tell us that you have to, Dharma Shastra tells us, Manu tells us, you have to keep writing these Smritis. So nothing un-Hindu or undharmic or whatever term you prefer about a position which says that we ought to not just continue living like they used to. So if they had problem with women, we do not have to have problem with women. We can say, okay, to heck with that, we write new smritis. We discard Manusmriti, or we discard the kind of shlokas which are not right, and we move on. I was invited to a world conference at Cornell University, wanted to organize with our funding on religious harmony and religious conflict. And it was going to happen 5 years later. The discussion started in 95. It was going to happen in the millennium year 2000. And they wanted to come up with resolutions on, why there is religious conflict. Yeah, and the idea was their idea, which I didn't agree with. Their idea was that you blame somebody who's committing violence against your religion. You blame each other. You know, that doesn't solve anything. So I said to them that we have 5 years, and what I'd like to do in the planning period is I'd like to sponsor that you get a team of postdocs who are from different religious backgrounds, and this small group will look at the primary texts of every religion in the world, major religion, and highlight things which are offensive. So anything about infidels, kafirs, slaves, Shudras, women, anything which is offensive by today's standards, it will be highlighted. And then we should have several days of panels with all the world leaders, taking them to task and saying, okay, what are you going to do about your own religion with these kind of points? Yeah? And so I said that. I thought I'd made a very interesting point. This lady, I've forgotten her name, Mary Jane something, her name. She was very interested in that. She thought this is a very clever idea. Then a few days later she called me very worried. She says, no, some of these religions I can't name to you. They're very angry for me suggesting this because they're saying, how dare you tamper with our texts. So texts are frozen. You can't tamper with the texts. So I said, tell them, we are not asking the resolution to delete those. We are saying that they will not be taught in today's context. We are not changing God's words, if that's what bothers them. We are saying that the highlighted portions, because they're offensive today, will not be taught. That's all we are saying. So she went back to them and said, not acceptable. So we withdrew our funding, because I felt that if it would be a facade to have a gathering of religious people in some kind of interreligious dialogue where it's all about everybody blaming somebody but not willing to do anything to their own problem. Yeah. Now, as a Hindu, I had no problem saying that I will say that certain aspects of Manusmriti which are offensive we will not teach. I have no problem with them. But I would only put that offer on the table on mutual grounds. They have to do the same. You see, sometimes in a game of chess, you go and you put your queen and you say, okay, this queen will be killed, but in the process, this guy will be checkmated. That sometimes you have to make a move like that. You have to make a move where you offer. So I offered that any text that is from my tradition, which is offensive to some class of humanity, I will take a stand, and I'm sure I can convince many of people of our tradition that we ought to deactivate teaching these verses. But I will only do it if the people of other religions are willing to subject their text to the same scrutiny and same due diligence, but they were not willing to do that. So our tradition has a stronger foundation because Smritis are separate. Smritis, it is not blasphemy to change Smritis. It is not blasphemy to critique Manusmriti like it is blasphemy to critique certain texts of certain religions. So I would not suggest that we are locked into a box, because we are not.
The thing is, lack of Indian strategic thinking, especially the past 300 or 600 or 800 or 1,000 years, which kind of brought us to the state of affairs, and the lack of continuity in the evolution of thought.
Yes.
Evolution of thought.
Yes.
And the way we adapt, like Smritis get adapted over a period of time.
Right.
That continuity is also lost.
Yes.
These two things I think you should
Please,
touch
okay.
upon, and that will be really nice.
Okay, then we'll close. So, this is a good question. Loss of Indian strategic thinking, because I noticed this to be the case that, I went to the World Sanskrit Congress in Delhi, and there were like 1,200 to 1,500 top Sanskrit scholars from India and a couple hundred from the United States, Europe, all over the world, including Japan and Russia and all that. And I found that the Sanskrit, our traditional scholars stopped doing Purva Paksha of the other. The Purva Paksha of the West is not being done. Whereas what we ought to do, what I'm doing in my own way to the best of my abilities, is gazing at the West as an Indian. I'm doing kind of a Purva Paksha of the West. And traditionally it has been our strength that we did Purva Paksha of other thoughts, other schools of thought. That was how we learned. We learned by saying, I'll talk to you about, understand how you're thinking, I'll give you a reply, you do the same to me. So the Purva Paksha and the Siddhanta, all that stuff. But there hasn't been a Sanskrit university or a traditional university where there is a very deep critique of Western thought, Western enlightenment, biblical thought, postmodernism, post-structuralism. Nobody has done that. I am trying to do that, but in single-handedly I can do that only so much. So I think one reason for this lack of strategic thinking is strategic thinking requires doing what Krishna does in the Kurukshetra, which is he does a analysis of the strengths and weaknesses of everybody. This guy is like that guy is like that. He's doing strategic thinking. He's doing a kind of market analysis of who's who are the players, how is the Kurukshetra. We haven't had our people do that for some time. Now, whether it is arrogance that we just became very complacent, it's not about, we shouldn't blame others because this is a point we should blame ourselves. Why did our mathas, why did the Shankaracharya Matha not produce volume after volume on Hegelian thought and this Western Enlightenment thought and a response to Voltaire and a response to Mark Twain's thought or structuralism and whatnot? Why didn't they have a whole cell? Now, this was going on in China. China, they were translating Western thought into Mandarin. The Chinese scholars were being sponsored to translate Western thought into Mandarin so that the Mandarin traditionalists could study it and keep giving response to it and inoculate the Chinese population from being colonized. If our mathas and other traditional guys had been studying Western thought all the time and building antidotes to it, which is what I am trying to do, and that requires an interfaith encounter. So I can build antidotes to it and educate our people. But it is happening right now very late. If we had been doing it for 300 years, we would not have created the Brown Sahibs, we would not have created all this, the St. Stephen syndrome and all these elite westernized syndrome, because we would have been raising people saying, okay, they will say this to you, but here is how you should think about it. You see how to respond. That's one. Second, I think, is a fault of others, or let's say not fault, but they did it for their own reasons. It made sense for them, and we fell prey to that. And that is the strategic thinking of India. India's relations was not controlled out of India but out of London. International relations of India were controlled out of London always, and it was not controlled out of here. So even now our foreign ministry, they react. They do not have a very deep study of, we do not have area studies. We do not have a culture of, my daughter is in doing her MA in New York University on international relations. And so I read all her books and all that. And I find how deep is the US government investment and think tanks and churches in investing in research on every area of the world, every kind of lineage, every history, what they're doing today, who's who. They're mapping the world ideologically and politically in a very great detail, so that they have a map and they can strategize with that knowledge. Because like from the business world, you need to analyze all the players in the marketplace in order to have a strategy. You can't have a strategic thinking in a vacuum. You need to know who's who and what they're up to. We have not even today created an academic system or a foreign affairs system or a think tank system in India to analyze. There is, in the US, South Asian studies is government funded in 32 universities or 35 universities. Government funded. And in church seminaries in more than that even. Funded. Okay, and then China studies even bigger scale than that, Middle East studies bigger scale than that. Now in India, they ought to have by now 30, 40 universities in India doing China studies and learning Mandarin, reading Mandarin newspapers, understanding how to read their mind, what are they saying, what are they thinking, what is Confucian history, how do they think about us. There should be 30, 40 universities doing Pakistan studies, some doing Bangladesh studies. Like that we should have had by now. Because we are so ignorant about all this. I was in a gathering where in Delhi, where the discussion came on whether Tibetan language should be classified in the Sanskrit family or in the Chinese family of languages. Yeah, that's a discussion. Now, Tibetan was developed highly modeled on Sanskrit. The script is not, but the language, grammar, structure is. That is why from Tibetan you can translate back to Sanskrit very quickly. The discussion came, and there were, like most discussions, two sides. So the final decision was, let's call University of Chicago and get the answer. That is the final answer. Okay? So this is the state of strategic thinking about ourselves.
Let me say one thing. We have a Sri Lanka problem. See, the Tamil problem there. Would you believe there is not one professor in India who knows Sinhalese and who can translate perhaps if there is a document that is made available to you in Sinhalese, there won't be anyone in the whole of Tamil Nadu who can read and understand what the hell is being said there.
Yeah.
This is our great interest in Sri Lanka,
Yeah.
our involvement in
Yes,
Sri Lanka.
the good, very good
We
example.
will have to go to, again, an American professor.
Yeah, yeah,
Understand what is being said in Sinhalese.
yeah.
I mean, if you have a relationship of that sort with a neighbor who is 22 kilometers away, and what is the point in your getting fits, about the massacre there,
Yeah.
this is there, that, I mean, all that will happen.
Excellent.